Camp season is officially over. I'm Stephen Means. That's Andrew Gillis, and this is Buckeye Talk. We just wrapped up Ohio State's 5th camp of June. Some interesting guys out there as well. Get the text 614-350-3315. All that information, all that news, all that analysis went to your phone first before you had to wait a day to get it on a podcast. You were getting it through the text first. 2-week free trial, $3.99 after that, 614-350-3315. We'll get to that later on. But first, Ohio State had another pretty interesting weekend in terms of additions to its 2025 recruiting class, Andrew. It's up to 16 commits for the number one recruiting class in the country. Let's start with what happened on Friday, because I think it was a bit of a troll job. Not in the fact that they landed him, it's just when they decided to make it public that they landed him, and that's Quincy Porter, the wide receiver out of New Jersey.
Yeah, well, I think it is also a troll job with what Ohio State's doing, because it feels like every time I'm on vacation, somebody commits and I'm not there for it. So, yeah, Quincy Porter, he commits. He's a top 50 recruit, number 49 overall player, number 8 receiver in the class, 4-star recruit, obviously. Really interesting type of player here, because he's one of the bigger bodies that Ohio State is looking at receiver. And, when you look at some of the guys that they've been recruiting, it's, 6'1", 6 feet. Desi Jones is under 6 feet tall. Now you have Quincy Porter at 6'3", 190. He just gives you a little bit of something else, right? He's got nice track speed. That's impressive, obviously. But the size really, really kind of jumps off the page. The size is really what you see. They view Dez as kind of a slot receiver, whereas Quincy Porter, kind of views that he can probably play on the outside. If they want to move him on the inside, he can. So he's kind of like your prototypical, this is going to play on the outside type of receiver. I think you look at Ohio State's kind of board and, where they're at. And I don't think it's crazy to say that, they might be bringing in 4 receivers in this class, or at least if they want to, just kind of judging on who they want and some of the guys that they're after. So Quincy Porter was a big addition, because you look at some of the top names on this board and those aren't guarantees. So now you have Quincy Porter in the mix. You bring in this different type of body, this different type of mold, and now you've got 2. And I think it gives you a baseline level of quality, and it gives you a baseline level of quantity.
As you mentioned, the number 49 player, number 8 wide receiver in the country, 6'3", 190. He's in the same vein as what Marvin Harrison Jr. was, what Jeremiah Smith are, as X receivers on the outside, as you mentioned, the bigger guys. The reason I brought up the word troll in this situation is because Quincy Jones was actually supposed to be in Ann Arbor this past weekend. He took his official visit to Ohio State the previous weekend, but it felt like he came out of that visit feeling like, you know what, I'm probably going to be a Buckeye. He had maybe told him earlier in the week that he was probably shutting some things down. And by Thursday, it was very clear that he was going to end up committing to Ohio State. So on the day when he's probably supposed to be leaving for Ann Arbor for his visit, he's from New Jersey. Instead, he commits to Ohio State. So there's where the troll job is, hey, I'm supposed to be on Ann Arbor's campus right now, starting my official visit, but instead I'm committing to Ohio State. Before we move on here, you kind of mentioned it. Maybe they get 4 guys in this class. They've got 2 with Desi Jones and Quincy Porter. What does the rest of the board look like for Ohio State? And who are if you had to say if you had to predict right now, we're going to do that later this week. We're going to do Andrew's second prediction of the Ohio State 2025 recruiting class. But if you had to predict who those other 2 potential additions could be between now and signing day, who would you predict right now?
Well, I'm keeping an eye on Vernell Brown. He's a guy who's, he's from Florida. Obviously, that has been, really, really impressive and really, really good to Brian Hartline, right? He's kind of shown no problems going into that state and pulling out some talent. So it's going to be a battle for Vernell Brown. He's a top 40 player, and Ohio State's going to have to fend off some pretty talented schools, or at least some schools that are tugging at heartstrings for Vernell, right? He's got Miami on the official visit list. They were just there. Florida this past weekend. Florida State's this upcoming weekend. That's going to be an interesting recruitment to monitor, just kind of seeing how that unfolds. So I think Vernell Brown is up there. That would give you another top 50 receiver, not top 40 receiver. He'd be the highest rated receiver on your board. I think we're keeping an eye, obviously, on Decorian Moore to kind of see how that recruitment goes. 5-star player, number 3 overall player in the class. That might be a recruitment that goes down to signing day. That might be a recruitment that does go into the season. So we are going to have to kind of see where things land with him. Is that something where, hey, if Ohio State only has 3 receivers on the board, are they cooked if they have, or if they don't have 4 and they maybe need to make a move earlier and they have to move off of Decorian Moore? Are they comfortable with 3 and saying we're just going to wait and see with Moore and hopefully we get him? We'll have to see with that. So Decorian Moore, he's obviously in that mix. Dalen McCutcheon, another top 100 receiver. He was here a couple of weeks ago. He's from Texas. Phillip Bell was just here this past weekend, 4-star receiver, number 152 overall. He's from California. There's guys on this board that Ohio State could pivot to, but I think those would be the top 2 players on this board right now as you map this out: Vernell Brown and Decorian Moore. So those 2 are not guarantees, and if those things don't come to fruition, I think maybe you're looking at Dalen McCutcheon and Phillip Bell to join this class.
I don't want to just to follow up a little bit there. I would put Phillip Bell maybe closer to the top of that list. There are some people in that building who really love Phillip Bell, as you mentioned, number 152 player, number 16 wide receiver in the country. They actually think he should be a lot higher than that. And I think the name that got thrown out when talking about Phillip Bell was Emeka Egbuka. There was the exact words were, Phillip Bell is Emeka Egbuka, and I can see some of those similarities. 6'2", 195 right now. Maybe he's closer to 200 pounds by the time he gets here. But I mean, we talk about Emeka Egbuka and the versatility he has as a guy who can play on the inside and the outside. Maybe it's a similar thing with Phillip Bell. I know some momentum's already creeping towards Ohio State, and he took his official visit as well. But that's your list. I think, as you pretty much hit it spot on, those are the guys to really watch out for. I know we've mentioned Jamie French a couple of times on this pod. I think that ship has sailed. I don't necessarily think that's a race that mutually either side is in on at this point. This isn't just one way or the other. I think both sides have maybe moved on from each other as they explore other options. So that's number 1. That's the one that was maybe a little bit more of a surprise in terms of when you were expecting it to pop, Andrew. But the other guy, Isaiah West, I think we all came into the weekend expecting Isaiah to not necessarily leave Columbus without committing to Ohio State. Tell us more about the latest addition in the now pipeline between St. Joseph's Prep in Philadelphia and Ohio State and Columbus.
Yeah, I mean that was one of the things where we as journalists, this is very inside baseball, but you felt comfortable writing a pre-write about because I think from when it happened, you could kind of start to see the writing on the wall even a month ago, right? He visits Ohio State. The day he reports an offer, he decommits from Kentucky. All of a sudden, all these national writers and all these national crystal balls start to go in for Isaiah West. You can kind of see the way that that things were headed there, and it obviously ended with him committing on Sunday. Number 527 overall player in the class, number 44 running back. You mentioned it, St. Joe's Prep produced Kyle McCord. More importantly, produced Marvin Harrison Jr. It's also produced Jim Knowles. So Ohio State has had some ties to that school. And we know, Stephen, there are people in that building who think Isaiah West, if you were to tell them, hey, he's the number 44 overall or number 44 ranked running back in the country and the number 527 overall player in the country, they would laugh in your face. People in that building really, really like Isaiah West. I think one of the things that we've heard is receiving ability and kind of hands out of the backfield, making plays out of the backfield in space. He's a really, really physical player. I think, you read some of the scouting reports. I think everywhere it says muscled up or powerful or big body, something along those lines, because he's 5'11" and he's listed at 5'11", 208 pounds. That's a big kid for going into your senior year of high school, especially when you haven't seen a college weight program yet and you've got some kind of big push going on there for weight gain and things like that. You haven't had that yet. Isaiah West is about to get that. So this is a good running back. I think you watch the film and you're really impressed. He was the second running back commit under Carlos Lachlan. Carlos Lachlan brought in Bo Jackson a couple of weeks ago. We talked to him after the camp on Monday. We could talk about that a little later, but we talked to Bo Jackson. Then you bring in Isaiah West, and it's pretty clear that this room wants three, and I think the third running back in this potential Ohio State running back room trio could be to come on this weekend when you have Jordan Davison from California visiting. And I think that would be a mammoth of a recruiting class for Carlos Loughlin in his first cycle, because I think you get Jordan Davison and Bo Jackson. Those are two top 100 players. And then you get Isaiah West, who, I'm not saying I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, but you do watch the film and go, this guy's good. And he's a stout, powerful runner. You see the plays out of the backfield. There are just plays where he makes where it's very quick. He's got great short range speed, makes catches, and he's got great explosiveness out of the box. And I think that when you look at these running backs, you have to be pretty impressed with what they've got in Bo Jackson, Isaiah West, and they might be adding a third one here pretty soon.
I think Carlos Loughlin has made it abundantly clear how he wants this to go. You just mentioned Jordan Davison. He'll be visiting this weekend. We'll get deeper into that visit list, which I think is the most star-powered, whether you're talking about targets or commits. We'll get to that later this week as well. But this was Carlos Loughlin yesterday. This is like not long after Isaiah West made his commitment. This is on Twitter, by the way, or X, or whatever you want to call it. He puts up a photo, and it's my favorite football player, rap album, and basketball player as a kid. The phrase power of three typically refers to the concept of tripling something or the idea of the number three having significance or power in various contexts. Hashtag, and then he puts the emoji 3. The favorite football player is Bo Jackson. The favorite rap album is Kanye West's College Dropout. And then his favorite basketball player is Michael Jordan. So, I don't know, just to have a little bit of fun with
West, Jackson? Interesting.
Be a little bit more subtle in where you want to go with some things here. And we'll talk more about Jordan Davison this week. Yep. But what we've seen so far is 2 official visit weekends where Carlos Loughlin is active with targets, right? 2 of the 3. And 2 official visit weekends where Carlos Loughlin has landed the guy he wanted to land not long after that official visit. I think Isaiah West was headed home on Sunday as his visit wrapped up. Bo Jackson, I think, was already back at home on Monday. Do you think the way this is trending right now, do you think it's 3 for 3? Or are you expecting that Jordan Davison's going to be making a decision that's pro Buckeye sometime Sunday or Monday or Tuesday next week?
Yes, and here's why. Because follow... sometimes not always what they say, follow maybe some actions. You hear, mm-hmm. Steven obviously has said that before, and you hear that a lot. Jordan Davison visited in the spring. This was, mm-hmm. I believe, late March. This was pretty late into spring practice. He was here it was a big deal. I remember it was a huge deal that he was here. And then Ohio State was really, they were trying to roll out the red carpet for him. And Carlos Loughlin, I believe, had just started. Like, he had not just started, he had just been hired. Like, I don't even know if he was coaching yet, because, Steven, you remember, there were a couple spring practices where Ryan Day was coaching running backs because, hey, man, you got to move your life from Oregon. That's not exactly like the commute's a little longer. So it was a little bit of a layover, and Jordan Davison was very interested in Ohio State. And I know he was very close with Tony Alford, and he had a good relationship with Tony Alford. However, there hasn't really seemed to be a flip of interest from Ohio State to Michigan. Sometimes you see that. And there's nothing wrong with that. I want to be clear. If a player is really likes a position coach and that position coach moves on, sometimes that player and their interest follow that position coach. That's just the way it works. You want to play for that coach, or you want to play for that coordinator, or whatever. That hasn't really seemed to happen. And I think that's a really telltale sign that Jordan Davison is very interested in Ohio State. And if, there was maybe some question about it, you would be hearing it, I think, at this point. And we really haven't heard anything kind of negative to that contrary. So you're talking about a guy who is making Ohio State his last visit. Ohio State's the last visit of the cycle. Hasn't really been a ton of noise that, hey, school X has made a big push, or they've entered the picture, or it's them at Ohio State. You've really kind of felt that Ohio State was in the lead the whole way, even through a coaching change. And to me, this is maybe just my opinion, if you weather the coaching change, if you weather that storm and you still are interested in a school and you are still treating them like this and you are still the last visit, I think you have a pretty good idea where this might end up. Of course, I could be wrong, but that's just my read on that situation right now. And I think he is going to make it 3 for 3. And perhaps it's Sunday, perhaps it's Monday, perhaps it's in a month, perhaps he wants to do it before the season. But I do think he's going to make it 3 for 3.
What helps with that is that relationship isn't starting from scratch. Carlos Loughlin was recruiting Jordan Davison when he was at Oregon, the same with Isaiah West and the same with Bo Jackson. So 2 of the 3 locked in for Ohio State, no pun intended, for the running back room, while Brian Hartline also gets his second of potentially 4 wide receiver commits in this class. If you're watching this on YouTube, we're going to take a quick break here. Go find Bug-Eye Talk wherever you find podcasts. And listen, we got a whole 45 minutes more of podcasting and talking about Ohio State football here. Get the text 614-350-3315 and listen to Buckeye Talk wherever you listen to podcasts. And for those of you who are listening through Buckeye Talk, we'll be right back.